Wonderful. Okay, welcome everyone. I'm going to start again. This is the Introduction to Mobilizing Support for People with Disabilities Who Have Experienced Sexual Violence webinar series. My name is Tara Ahern, and I am the project director with the Illinois Self-Advocacy Alliance. I'm also one of the co-chairs for Illinois Imagines and one of the 2020 American Association of People with Disabilities HERN awardee. That's why we're here today. We're going to be talking about that in just a few minutes. I am also a person with a disability and also a survivor of sexual violence. And I'm really looking forward to presenting today with my colleague, Jane Jin. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Certainly. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jae-Jin Park. I am a project specialist with the Illinois Self-Advocacy Alliance. I also am connected with the University of Illinois at Chicago's Institute on Disability and Human Development, as well as having the pleasure of being the co-chair with Tara for Illinois Imagines Chicago. I also identify as a person with a couple of disabilities, and I'm glad to be here.
Great. Okay, so we're actually going to start today with our first poll. So Maggie, let's launch that poll. We want to celebrate who is here today. So click all that apply to you. If you're a person with a disability, self-advocate, if you work with a disability service agency, a rape crisis center, a family member or a friend, or an ally for people with disabilities. So we're going to wait a minute and see how the poll shakes out. Okay, we're at about 87%. If you want to participate in the poll, please do so. Okay, let's see. So we have about 74% of people here are with a disability service agency. Maggie, do you want to end the poll and then we can share the results? Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so we've got quite a variety of individuals here today. Thank you all for being with us. Okay, let's move on. Okay, I can still see the poll. Maggie, can you close it out?
It's closing on my end. You might just have to close out the box.
Okay, I have to. Okay, so yeah, so this webinar series is designed for all individuals that come into contact with this issue that we're going to talk about today. So we do have a wide variety of folks here. Thank you so much for joining us. Our objectives today are plentiful. We're going to discuss disability competence, language, and culture, and really dive in and think about the intersection of disability and sexual violence. We're going to talk about the impact of sexual violence on survivors, as well as list ways that we can support people with disabilities and really start to think about resources. So this is the first of 9 events that we are hosting, which is really exciting for us. And just wanting to refer back again, this grant was made possible through the American Association of People with Disabilities, a leadership project that I was awarded earlier this year. So the purpose of my project is to engage survivors with disabilities, rape crisis centers, and service providers in doing collaborative regional and statewide work that will hopefully improve services and policies, as well as opportunities for people with disabilities. And then also working with local teams to organize around this intersection trainings, as we're here today, and supporting the creation of empowerment groups. Okay, here's our next poll. Has anyone ever heard of Illinois Imagines? Maggie's getting that poll ready for us. Thank you. It's cool to watch the poll numbers go up. Have you heard of Illinois Imagines before? We're at about 85%. Okay, let's end the poll. Okay, so 64% of you have not. So we are going to go through what Illinois Imagines is. And I'm going to exit out of that. And here we go. Okay, so Illinois Imagines was a statewide project to improve services for people with disabilities who are victims of sexual violence. The project was funded from 2006 to 2018 and created a lot of the resources that we're going to talk about today and in subsequent trainings in our series. Some of the partners were, first and foremost, people with disabilities, the Illinois Department of Human Services, the Illinois Coalition Against Sexual Assault, various rape crisis centers around the state, disability service providers, and again, people with disabilities who are self-advocates. So the project ran till 2018 when the funding ran out, but there are some teams from the project that are still meeting, one of them being the Chicago team. So Jane, Pak, and I are co-chairs for that team. So we just wanted to kind of bring the awareness of what this project has done for this issue, especially again talking about resources. And some of the team members that we had specifically and still have support with and from are Access Living, Annixter Center, Chicago Hearing Society, Blue Tower Solutions, various self-advocates, and then as you'll see, we have other organizations that were part of and are still part of our team. Here are some photos, various photos of some of the work that we did throughout the project, various photo campaigns, marching in parades, things of that nature. So we have hosted several presentations. We also have many of our members who completed the 40-hour sexual violence crisis training. JJ and myself were two of those individuals. And creating informational videos and brochures that we translated into other languages. So the work of Illinois Imagines has continued, which is a great thing, and continues today. We're going to start out today by going through a list of things that people with disabilities want you to know, whether you are coming here today as a provider or an ally. These are some of the things that we hear often from folks that we engage with. And just a little background, at the Illinois Self-Advocacy Alliance, we engage with individuals who primarily have intellectual and developmental disabilities. But as we know, people sometimes have dual diagnosis or co-occurring disabilities. And so this webinar series is really designed to support individuals with all kinds of disabilities. And the things that we hear often are that, we've been hurt. We need support to move forward. We're not all the same. Everyone communicates. So listen carefully. Some of us may need accommodations to participate. We are experts on how our bodies work. We're credible witnesses. Please encourage others to include us. And thank you for supporting us. And also thank you all for being here. I know this is a really heavy topic, especially given everything that's going on in our nation today. So again, thank you so much for being with us as we go through this. So our first objective is to discuss disability competence, language, and culture. And, I don't want to take too much time here, but, just also to remind you that you should have received today's PowerPoint presentation. So obviously, feel free to refer back if I am going too fast. you can tell me in the chat box, and just know that you can refer to the notes later. So disability, what is disability? Why are we here today? Disability is defined as an impairment or activity limitation or participation restriction. So disability occurs when a person, their limitation, and their environment interact. And some of those things could be activities based participation, body structures or functions, health conditions, any limitations that occur while doing activities or functioning, and then again, those environmental and participation factors and restrictions. Here are some general types of disabilities. We have mobile and physical impairments, spinal cord disabilities or injuries, head injuries, traumatic brain injury, vision, hearing, cognitive or learning disabilities, psychological and invisible disabilities. The most recent evolution of the definition of disability emphasizes functional ability over a medical diagnosis and makes a distinction between the two concepts. So I want to kind of bring forward a thought and a reflection on how we think of disability and how our thoughts on it have changed over time. So disability, historically, I'm going to go forward here a little and then come back. Oh, I don't see my other slide. Okay, hold on a second. Oh, okay. So historically, the medical model of disability is really where we kind of center ourselves, right? So the notion that people are deformed, or people have a genetic predisposition that causes them to have a disability, right? And so we think of disability as something that that afflicts us, or that is something that we need to deal with, right, ourselves. But the more social and modern model of disability is that it's not something that a person has, but something that occurs within the environment outside the person. Disability is the interaction between all of these things. And so, putting forward that is a new social model that we want to be reflective of. And the civil rights model of disability says that disability is a social construct, meaning that it is society is not set up to support and empower people with disabilities. And so we need to be pushing ourselves to be in that space. Okay. So disability competence talks about how we don't need to know it all, right? If we're supporting individuals with disabilities, we don't have to be the experts. We ourselves as disabled people are the experts. And so we don't need to be knowledgeable about all those things. When you meet a person, you want to be respectful and treat them as and have them teach you what they want to share with you, right? So disability humility reinforces the fact that a survivor is the expert, and we should learn from them. Okay. So the contrast of paradigms, this is a resource that you can find in the Illinois Imagines curriculum, and all of those resources are located on their websites. And so we can also send out those resources to you all. So presume competence. When you think about someone with a disability, presume competence and check your assumptions, right? We want to make sure that we are creating a community where all are valued and included. Okay, a word on culture and language. There are many stigmas around sex and sexual assault. We know this. And there's also, stigmas around people with disabilities being sexual, which Jay-Jin is going to talk more about in a few minutes. And I just want to place an emphasis around person first language. I know in the disability community, in whatever spaces you're in, it could depend, right? Some people prefer identity first language. So I'm disabled, and I would say, I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a person with a disability, I'm disabled. So I think best practice is to really use person first language and, kind of go from there and let people kind of educate you on what they prefer. And then also bringing up the fact that there is a culture of compliance, especially for many people with disabilities, where we see that, people are in spaces where they have to ask for permission to do certain things. And, that's important to remember that some individuals, have have those experiences. So we want to always remember nothing about us without us. Gigi, and I think are you, do you want to start here?
Sorry, I had
Yeah.
it on mute. So
Oh,
sure.
no worries.
Um,
Okay.
so hi everybody. Yeah. So in terms of as Tara said, looking at disability definitions, and one of the things as we move into talking about the intersection of disability and sexual violence is understanding and a reminder about disability myths. Those of us with disabilities are very familiar with the power of disability myths, all the misconceptions that people with disabilities are asexual, that people with disabilities are more childlike, that are maybe not as credible because of our disability, because there's that stereotype or misconception that we get easily confused. All of these lead into stigma. And all of these things also, and all of these are inaccurate. They're not true, but they're still part of our society. So it's important to recognize that and the influence that they have. And that influence can lead to risk. Increased risk. A little bit. Next.
Are
So
you, wait, Gigi, are you seeing blue on the screen? Like blue scribbles?
yes, actually, now that I do,
Okay.
I'm not sure what that is.
I'm not sure what that is. Okay, let me stop sharing for a second and I'm going to try to troubleshoot this. Bear with us, folks. Thank you so much. Okay.
It's like interesting new little technical glitches
Yeah.
that we're experiencing. But as Tara is troubleshooting, again, it's like the power, the something about the power of myth is stereotypes. We all know that if we take a second to really ask the question, is this true? Is this are the stereotypes have any worth? It's easy to debunk. But as we'll talk about, when we talk about how in terms of perpetrators and how uh, stereotypes are used to are connected to increased risk or victimization of sexual violence. It comes down to the idea of myths and stereotypes is that it's convenient for society, the larger society, because it's easy to say, if I believe this, then it's not necessarily my problem. Or if I don't know anybody with a disability, then I can believe this and not really think about it. And it's understandable, but it's important to resist that pull and to actively choose ourselves to put those myths aside and really see the people in front of us. Because one of the things that that myths do is it makes it easier for those of us with disabilities to be separated from our humanity. One of the things one of the things that Tara talked about was people first language, and and we fought for decades and we continue to fight to say we're people first. We're not just our disability, and part of that is because of the influence and the power of the myth. Um, so moving on, so let's talk about, oh, wonderful, um, connecting disability and sexual violence. Move on to the next one. So to begin with, let's just call some facts and figures. Reality is that according to the Department of Justice, statistical data and crime reports, um, people with disabilities are 3 times at higher risk of sexual victimization than able-bodied folks. And in 2018, NPR and Joe Shapiro of NPR did a very 7 series in-depth report on sexual violence affecting intellectual and developmental disability for individuals. And in their research and their reports found that people with IDD were up to 7 times greater risk of sexual victimization. We wanted to highlight these statistics just to really very clearly combat the idea that sexual violence does not happen. There is that myth that sexual violence happens with people with disabilities, when in fact it really does. So again, in terms of relationships from victims to offenders, there's a big perception that offenders who commit sexual violence, usually it's like a stranger danger type of attacks. And those are the minority. The vast majority of sexual violence that occurs with people that are victims, who are people with disabilities, or the general community at large, are acquaintance rate. Between 80 to 85% of sexual violence cases are people that know each other. In cases involving people with disabilities who are victimized, the offenders are acquaintances, service providers, caregivers, drivers, and their friends. An unfortunate reality, but it is important to recognize. Some other numbers regarding prosecution and incidents is, as you can see, 80% of the women and 30% of male identified folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities have been sexually assaulted or abused. Out of that number, 50% or half of the women who were assaulted are assaulted more than once, are assaulted multiple times, have experienced multiple assaults. And in terms of reported cases, the researchers have found that only roughly 3% of cases involving sexual victimization of individuals with disabilities actually get reported. So 3%. So close to 97% of cases go unreported. And we'll talk about some of those reasons why that is in a little bit as well. Next. All right, so we have another little poll. So if Maggie can launch the poll, the question is, why is it important to discuss disability and sexual violence? I'll take a minute. Pick all the ones that you think are applicable. Great. Yeah, it is cool to see the numbers come in, the responses come in. Alrighty. I think. Oh, okay. I think if we're done, we can end the poll. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, and the fact of the matter is that all of these are accurate. It is important to, the reasons why it's important to talk about sexual violence and disability is because, as we discovered in War One, people with disabilities are raped and sexually abused and assaulted. It's also important because people with disabilities are at higher risk. We want to talk about this and discuss this so that we can find ways of how to support survivors, and that people with disabilities who have experienced sexual violence have the right to seek services and make sure that we can help them find those services. All of those are accurate. Thank you. Moving on. Next. So in terms of risk factors, there are a lot of risk factors. Some of those on the screen are the reliance of support services, poverty, inaccessibility and isolation, um, the devaluation and stigma, and discrimination. And some of these are cultural and systemic um, and some of them are connected to our disability. And one thing I want to make clear is that as we talk about risk factors, these are all conditions or environmental situations that may increase risk, but by no means am I implying or are we saying that the victim is to blame or has any control over the fact that they're victimized. They're not to blame. These factors are just situational or environmental factors that an offender can exploit. So, we talked about disability myths and stereotypes that leads to stigma. Because society has a negative image of people with disabilities, that tends to send a message that people with disabilities, again, have less credibility, or that they're protected, so they're not, or if they're not sexual, then this is not something that society needs to worry about. And again, perpetrators understand this and can use that belief to manipulate and exploit a victim. Um, Again, discrimination makes it harder for people with disabilities to be seen or believed. And again, that erodes credibility. Individuals, many, not all, but many individuals with disabilities do live in poverty. And offenders can exploit that and say, creating opportunity can say, I can help you find a job or give you money, um, and then use sexual activity or sexual acts as a way of manipulating the victim into sexual exploitative behaviors or acts in exchange for money, as a way of giving that false sense of moving out of poverty. Okay. And then reliance of services, we'll talk in a little bit when we talk about accommodations. Then go to the next slide, please. So some additional risk factors I'll start with the center one on disability. One of my disabilities is low vision. I can't drive. Sometimes I need assistance with transportation, of reading, of of, of getting information because of my vision loss. Other individuals with disabilities who may need assistance with personal care assistance, a driver, someone who helps manage their medication, or other types of needs, an offender can exploit that need. An offender, in my case, could say, well, since I'm your sole person that can drive you to your medical appointments or your other appointments, if you tell people that I'm touching you or sexually abusing you, I'll make sure that you're stuck out in the middle of nowhere with no way to get home. I'm also medication dependent, and an offender can use that and exploit that as a threat and saying, I'll make sure that you don't get your medication that you need to live. Individuals with disabilities who need personal care attendants for eating or bathing or moving, transitioning from their bed to their chairs or like those types of needs. Again, offender can exploit that and threaten um, to withhold those types of services to force their victim. Okay. Along with that is, as Tara mentioned earlier, is the socialized compliance or the socialization to follow authority. Many of us with disabilities, again, because of our disability needs and accommodation needs, have been socialized. Oh, follow the IEP, follow the treatment plan. Your doctor prescribed this medication or this treatment. It's important that you followed. We've been socialized to believe this idea, to follow the professional prescriptions and not really challenge that. And again, myself, I remember thinking back from childhood on up to adulthood, in some way, shape, or form, getting this message. And then when there were times when I disagreed with a provider, it was challenging to, took an extra effort to do that self-advocacy and challenge authority. But so individuals with disabilities who have been socialized to follow authority, if the offender is a caregiver, is a service provider, is a driver, or is in that, provider role, caregiver role, there's that added layer of, well, this person supposedly knows what's better for you or is there to help you, therefore don't really push back or don't make waves. And that again makes it something that the perpetrator can exploit, manipulate, intimidate the victim into silence. And then the lack of information and rights, which we'll touch on, is that, again, going back to the stigma and the stereotypes, people with disabilities aren't sexual, don't need to know about sexual information. If they're not given this information, that lack of information increases risk because a victim doesn't know that what's happening to them, doesn't know what, maybe doesn't know what to call it, or how to disclose, and there adds that layer of feeling trapped and alone. Okay, moving on, okay, next one. So we can move on to objective 3, which is talking about the impact of sexual violence. I want the next slide is, we can go to the one. I want to play a short of the NPR piece. Just as a warning, you are going to hear from survivors that talk about their experiences, and it can be emotional. So just that warning. And Tara, if you click on a little speaker piece, it should start the audio. Did it start?
Do you hear it? Do you hear it, Trajan?
No, we don't hear it. Oh, it's really quiet.
Okay.
It just does.
When the abuse happened, she couldn't even
Oh.
identify it as rape. She didn't get sex ed in school.
There we go.
Okay.
The older man who abused her was related to someone who lived in her house. She'd been taught to trust him. She knew she didn't like it, that it was hidden, but she was confused. She thought maybe it was a relationship, a bad one.
I had to figure out that it's not my fault. I had to go through all the memories and name it and open up the box that you really don't want to open up. Pandora's box.
It took a lot of therapy. Finding a therapist who knew how to talk to someone with her disability was hard, and getting there was even harder. Robinson doesn't drive. She confided in a friend who then came every week to give her a ride. Robinson didn't want to tell her overprotective parents. And when she finally did tell her mother, she then had to deal with her mother's own feelings of failure and guilt.
That's why people would get angry, is because we didn't tell our own family members. But here I'm telling a stranger, which is a therapist. That gets our families angry.
There's a wide range of intellectual disability. Some people have significant disabilities, mental and physical. Maybe they can't speak or they need assistance from family or staff for basic things like eating to personal things like being bathed. The vast majority, though, have mild intellectual disability. There's a new generation that grows up and gets better chances in school. Some now even go to college programs. But pretty much everyone with intellectual disabilities has one thing in common. They depend upon other people for assistance, and that puts them at risk.
We are taught to trust grown-ups more than anyone else would be, because when you have a disability, people are always telling you, do as that person says, do as this person says, and all this other stuff.
That's Thomas Mangrum. He says he was a young boy when he was assaulted by a deacon at his church. He told his parents, but they never said anything about it to him again. Mangrum says people with intellectual disabilities just aren't believed.
They think if you got a disability, that means you lie. That you can't really tell the truth or you don't know what the truth is.
People with intellectual disabilities often do have trouble speaking or describing things in detail or in proper time sequence. Our investigation found that makes it harder for police to investigate and for prosecutors to win these cases in court. But when sexual assaults go unpunished, then perpetrators are free to abuse someone again. It's one reason the NPR numbers show the rate of assault for this population is so high. Thomas Mangrum, who lives in Washington, D.C., thinks it's a matter of bias.
And a lot of us in the disability community, people don't really see us. People don't see us at all. They just see our disability, and that's it.
Thank you, Tara. We can go back to the slide. So,
Can you see
Take a-
my screen?
we're back.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead and take a breath, everybody. I think it's important to kind of take some of that in and take that in. As you heard from Tom and Debbie and Joe Joe Shapiro was also doing some narrative. You heard from them, talk about their experiences, feeling that as individuals with disabilities, the ongoing struggle of not being seen, not being believed. As we talked about earlier, they reminded us about the reality of the messages that we should follow authority and follow along. All of those things adding up to making it adding to barriers and challenges to disclosure, or the feeling like this bad thing happened, but I don't know if anyone will believe me. And those are added to the emotional turmoil of being victimized sexually. And the consequences of sexual abuse and sexual violence are many, and these are just a few. And it does affect a person's ability, their independent living, their housing, their health, their physical and mental health, possibly their abilities to, in terms of relationships, friendships, romantic relationships. It can definitely affect a survivor's ability in their professional life because of the emotional turmoil. And one of the things, the reality of sexual violence is that it is an emotionally traumatic experience. In a nutshell, means that the person experienced something that is so overwhelming, it's outside their ability to cope with it. And it's so upsetting, so overwhelming of feelings that many survivors can go through are feelings of confusion, anger, sadness, sense of loss of control, loss of power. They question their own judgment. And as Debbie and Tom's cases remind us, that because of their cases, their perpetrators were providers or known to them. Like the person that's part of my inner circle, someone that I had some level of trust or comfort with, did this to me, hurt me this badly. What's wrong with me? What did I do wrong? So victims are the first ones that blame themselves. And that's not true. It's not their fault. The feelings of shame and guilt and being damaged and broken and anger and sadness are all valid and real and important to honor those feelings. But the idea, the belief that somehow it's their fault, it's important for those of us as friends and allies and just people who care to say, no, that's not your fault. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. We can go on to the next slide. So, and just finishing up the potential consequences, because of the overwhelming emotionalness, people are struggling with those feelings. It can lead to, again, as affecting a person's ability to work. If you've ever been really upset, it's hard to focus on or to study. And that fear of confusion and that doubt, again, can be very difficult for people to connect with people, with their friends or family, or rebuild friendship. Having said that, rebuilding and reconnecting with people and rebuilding a healthy life is very possible with support. I've worked as a rape crisis counselor and advocate for many years, and I feel very honored and privileged to have when survivors have chosen me and have given me the honor of listening to their stories and including me in their process of helping them through and giving them resources in whatever small way that I could. And the strength and courage of survivors is something that I'm forever appreciative of and will never minimize. Survivors have a lot of strength. So let's talk, switching gears a little bit. And again, take a little breath if you need to. Sometimes I do, even talking about this stuff. I want to spend a little bit talking about offenders and the tactics that they use. Offenders are very good at manipulating their victims. They're very good at mind games. And when perpetrators pick a target and that individual or victim that they want to pursue is a person with a disability, they will use a person's disability and ways of exploiting that. So, again, as we mentioned earlier, a person's disabilities, accommodation needs, or service needs, a perpetrator will get to know their victim and start to befriend them and start out doing nice things. And as they build some kind of rapport or connection and friendship, or if they're a service provider and start to earn the victim's trust as a good service provider, they will try to get more access over their victims' needs, whether that's control over their medication, or in some cases, building the trust up so that their victim will make the perpetrator able to sign off on their SSI or other benefit checks, get some control over their victim's money. When the offender gets that control, they will use threats, intimidation tactics, shaming tactics, bullying tactics to, again, force their victim into complying into their sexually exploitative abusive behaviors. We'll talk a little bit some of those tactics in the next slide. Next one. So as I said, disability services. So as we mentioned earlier, in terms of like driving, reading, interpretation, ASL interpretation, in-home care, whatever those type of services are, offenders can exploit those services. And in many cases, offenders will include or do sexually abusive behaviors as part of those service delivery. So, for example, an individual that needs someone to help them change clothes, or hygiene or feeding, other types of daily living, offenders will include or interject sexually abusive, inappropriate touching, or sexually abusive behavior as part of helping the victim dress or transition from their bed to their chair. Again, as a way of doing the abusive behavior, but also and also by doing that, it makes it more challenging for when the victim discloses. Because of stigma, society may say, well, no, the person just got confused. This person is hired and is there to help them change. And changing means removing of clothing and touching maybe in private parts. the person just got confused. So the offender knows that stereotype and believes that society will have a harder time believing the victim because of that. And again, it's why it's important for us as society to really crush that myth and throw it away. Again, if the person has a disability limiting access to communication or adaptive equipment, and the offender takes control of that, they will use threatening threats or intimidation tactics or methods of withholding access to those adaptive equipment in order to force compliance. Okay, so those are tactics that are used. In the domestic violence and sexual violence word, all the tactics that we use, the offenders are, we pull them into what we call power and control tactics. And these power and control wheels that are on the screen are representations of the different things. We talk about bullying and emotional coercion. If a disabled person has children, an offender can threaten to report the disabled adult as a bad parent or threaten to harm the kids or anything like that to, again, maintain control. If they have access over their medications or their money, as we mentioned, those are financial or economic control points. So the other reality that's important is when we talk about perpetrators is to break the myth that perpetrators sexually abuse or sexually assault out of sexual desire. Sexual desire has nothing to do with sexual assault. Offenders attack their victims out of a sense of wanting power and control. It's that feeling of having ultimate control over their victim that the offender, that's the value that the offender gets. It's not anything to do with sexual gratification. Okay, so next. So in terms of barriers to, one of the risk factors that we talked about earlier was the lack of access to information and the lack of information about rights. And some of the systemic barriers is that we in our country has had a long history of debating access to comprehensive sex ed. The basic facts and figures of what body parts are called, what their function is, the right to body autonomy, the right of what is consent, and the right to say no. For many of us in the disability community, this basic information about what our body parts are called, what sex organs and genitalia are called, what their purpose is, and that we have the right to say no is minimized. But again, without that information, without the language, without the information, individual disabilities are vulnerable because they know instinctively this feels wrong. But if they don't have the words, they cannot communicate adequately with that and ask for help. Similarly, in terms of the lack of the ongoing debate around sex ed, is for staff training. Staff provide, those of you that provide services, whether it's in-home care, transportation, day programming, walk-in services, Center for Independent Living, whatever the services may be, part of supporting and serving individuals with disabilities is, all aspects of life, leisure, work, education, daily living. And that includes relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, and sexual exploration. And I know that staff would be willing and open to be supportive of individuals in conversation, in training, in supporting them, learning and exploring in appropriate ways sexual identity and sexuality information. But if they're not trained on what is appropriate, or there is no training developed, staff are at a loss. And so there's a need to help staff learn the skills to better navigate these issues in a healthy way. And then again, tied to that is just the ongoing policies that are connected with the overwhelming stigma and the clinginess of our society to the stereotypes and beliefs and ideas that disabilities should not be sexual. Because we're disabled, we shouldn't be sexual. We shouldn't be getting married or having kids solely because of disability status. And that's a huge example of ableism and discrimination. And one of the reasons that we fight so strongly around people first languages, that as people, as human beings living with disabilities, we as people have the full range of human experience and human desires, including sexual exploration. So it's important to really acknowledge and value that. Okay. Next. So as we move into, before we talk about resources, these are some 5 tips. We've talked about perpetrators and the effects of survivors. And one of the things that's important that we want to share was some very simple tips on how we as human beings that care, that just compassionate people, if there's someone that comes to us and says that sexual violence is part of their life history, these are some 5 simple things that we can all do to show that we care. First of all is to believe them. There are a lot of reports and studies that prove people do not lie about this. Just believe them. Don't interrogate, don't question, just offer to believe and take it in. Offer to listen. One of the biggest fears and concerns and worries for survivors is that feeling of nobody wants to believe me, nobody wants to help me, no one wants to hear this. But if you make the effort to say, I care about you, and if you want, I will sit here with you and you can talk about what you're feeling and thinking, and I'll just take it in. So you're not alone in this moment. So just offering to listen is a huge help. Tell them the words, it's not your fault. And you may keep reminding them, it's not your fault. You did not do anything wrong. I'm sorry this happened to you. You did not deserve it. And this is not your fault. You are not to blame. Remind them of that reality. Respect their space. Someone who's just disclosed that they've been sexually victimized may be very hypersensitive about their personal space. So, and out of compassion and concern, we may want to hold their hand or hug them. And that's great, but ask, is it okay if I give you a hug to show you that I care? Is it okay if I just hold your hand? So again, asking that lets them know that you care about and you're wanting their consent, valuing and empowering them in that way. And then lastly is just offer them resources. Let them know that there are organizations, there are Red Crisis Centers all over Illinois and all over the country that have really wonderful, compassionate, caring advocates and counselors and therapists who are willing to listen and help them through whatever they're going through. And all the Red Crisis Centers in Illinois that are connected with the Illinois Coalition Against Sexual Assault, all the services are fully free, there's no cost, and fully confidential. And so their privacy is guaranteed. Okay, so those 5 things, believe them, listen, remind them it's not their fault, respect their space, and let them know where they can get further help, private help, are all simple that all of us can do. Okay. So we can go on to the next slide.
Okay.
And I'll turn over to Tara.
Thank you, Jae-Jen. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the ways that we can support all people with disabilities, including those who have experienced sexual violence. The experience of disability can be minimized by designing environments to accommodate varying functional abilities and providing individualized solutions when needed. So some of the things that we have come to learn are very helpful. One is a principle called universal design. Hopefully you've heard of it. If not, here's a great little slide for you. So as you see on this slide, we have a picture of a ramp that also has some stairs, which is not very helpful, right? So universal design is really the idea that we can design spaces, whether it's architecture, the way we communicate, the technology we use, and the ways that we learn that are really helpful to the most amount of people. And as we know, disability is not a unique experience. 1 in 4 people has a disability in the world, and everybody knows someone who has a disability. You can join this community at any time, right? And so when we think about accessibility, accessibility features benefit everybody, especially thinking about things like elevators. Those benefit mothers with strollers, or so I think that notion that we can design things to help the most amount of people. This is an interesting slide, and I want to point out something that you might be noticing. The word communication on my screen is in yellow font, and so it's pretty hard to read, and that is on purpose. This is actually a little trick that I learned from a colleague at Center for Independent Futures named Kathy. She and I were doing a similar presentation to this, and I saw this slide and went in and changed the fonts, and she kind of nudged me and said, "Oh, that was intentional." So this is just to kind of show that the small things that we can do to help broaden accessibility, like even just fonts, making sure that the fonts we use in presentations and are readable, and really the sizing is bigger so that the most amount of people can benefit. Okay. So another thing that we can do to support people, which I talked about earlier, is to use person first language. So putting the person first and not using labels, right? Assuming that people can make their own decisions until determined otherwise. And I know this is something that we see a lot in the intellectual and developmental disability world, especially as support staff or agencies. We spend a lot of time providing services for individuals and assessing needs, and kind of seeing people in the context of what is wrong or what we need to support. And I think that sometimes we have to get out of that way of thinking to really assess a person as a whole, and to stay away from things like ableist language. I think that kind of goes without saying, right? But also just creating spaces where people can explore, and as Jajan mentioned earlier, exploring healthy relationships, boundaries, consent. These are things that we really need to foster in the people that we support. The next thing is to encourage self-advocacy, whether this is you yourself. I think we can all benefit from this. This is on the slide here, you'll see what is a handout that was created by the Illinois Self-Advocacy Alliance. This is something that we use often when we do workshops and trainings for individuals with disabilities on self-advocacy. So thinking about self-advocacy as if it were a puzzle, and the pieces are who, what, where, when, how, and why. So when we talk about advocacy, we go through this and we'll say, if you're a self-advocate wherever and whenever, and if you know the pieces, you can kind of figure out and problem solve an action plan on the spot. So, who are we talking about? What is the issue? Maybe it's that you want to speak up at your next staffing because you don't agree with some of the goals that were set, or maybe you want an additional goal. Maybe it's that you want to get a job in the community, or you want to explore your community by yourself. And so those are the things that we want to help people figure out solutions to, as opposed to just, having to accept the word no, right? And this is also something that we have seen support staff or families use to help individuals think about self-advocacy. And then as we start to kind of wind down, we want to really reinforce self-care. I think this is something that we can all benefit from, thinking about what are the ways that you just kind of take time for yourself, whether that's physical activity, emotional, mental health, some of the social things that we still can do together, whether it's, Zoom calls. I don't know, we might all have a little bit of Zoom fatigue, but there's lots of things that we can do, right? Whether it's spiritual or exploring hobbies, kind of thinking through your physical space and, making some changes that reflect a healthy environment, right? Doing some work financially or work, with time management. I think these are all really great ideas and thoughts to kind of put in your head as we wind down. So the last objective we have is to start talking about resources that are available when we are supporting people with disabilities who have experienced sexual violence. And I do want to remind you all that this is the first of 5 webinars around mobilizing support for people with disabilities. So we have 3 webinars next week around considerations for specific groups. So we have one targeting rape crisis centers, one specifically for people with disabilities, and another for disability service providers. So I'd encourage you to also register for those so that you can, those are more of a deep dive into resources. But here initially is a really great list that was compiled by the Illinois Self-Advocacy Alliance. So again, you will have these links in the PowerPoint. You can click on these. These are live links, so you can go refer back to these. And just a couple of things that we want to highlight. This one here, the Department of Human Services Sex Ed curriculum page, and also on the website, there is a lot of really great resources. I do want to mention, because I don't think it was brought up here, but here in Illinois, recently there was a House bill passed, House Bill 3299, that will mandate that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities can have access to sex education and resources if they want it. This is a huge, huge win for advocates in the state of Illinois. And I know that it is something that is a little bit scary for providers, reasonably so, right? And so I think that probably a lot of you on the webinar today are here because this is a really important topic, and maybe your agency is just starting to figure out what that new what that's going to look like at your agency, whether it's updating policies and procedures or how to actually provide curriculum, what curriculums to use. These are all things that we're going to talk through in the next couple webinars. So please register for those again. And then also the Illinois Self-Advocacy Alliance website has a ton of resources that we've created and compiled. And then here we have Illinois Centers for Independent Living. Those are organizations that you can connect with in your region, wherever you are. Those exist throughout the country. And then we have just some other resources here, the University Center for Excellence, and then Equip for Equality, which is our protection and advocacy organization in Illinois. And I just want to refer to another project called Envision Illinois, which started in 2013 and is a statewide collaboration. This is very similar to Illinois Imagines, but focuses on doing work for domestic violence. So just to kind of point out, in Illinois, we have different funding streams and things are a little bit siloed. So we do have sexual violence and domestic violence that are funded differently. So as we know, these issues occur, they kind of go hand in hand oftentimes. And so there are separate resources that exist, but again, a lot of times people experience both simultaneously. So Envision Illinois, their focus is to foster a collaboration between community agencies and of course self-advocates to improve outreach across systems to survivors. And then you can access their resources on their website. Okay, so as we wind down, I want to play a video, well, it's a video, an audio clip of a self-advocate named Kathy Saunders. The photos that you see here are Kathy at presentations and meetings, and also reading some of her poetry. She is a self-advocate poet and writer. She's a phenomenal writer. She has a book that has been published of her poetry. It is on Amazon. So I would encourage you all to click on this link when you get the PowerPoint and purchase her book. It's very affordable. I'm planning to give it to everyone I know for Christmas and the holidays, Hanukkah. Yeah, she is a phenomenal self-advocate, and we really wanted to have her with us today, but unfortunately, technology has proven really challenging for a lot of people with disabilities, and Kathy is unfortunately no exception to that. And so I did have an opportunity to connect with Kathy and record a poem that she wrote at a training in Bloomington several years ago. There was a really large group of advocates and providers and Rape Crisis Center staff who gathered together to really process this issue of sexual violence against people with disabilities. And Kathy, during the 2 or 3 days, wrote this poem and shared it at the end of the training, and I want to share it with you all. So let us take a listen. And Jajan, if you or Maggie, if you guys can confirm that you hear it.
A catalyst of peace.
Do you hear that?
Yes.
Okay.
Empower me. I want to be a catalyst of peace. Where there is sexual violence, let me show sexual liberation and patience. Where there is ignorance of knowledge, let me educate. I want to be a catalyst of peace. Bring forth the comrades who will labor with me. Where there is pain, make me a salve to heal the hurt. Provide my hands with a tender touch so that hearts will permeate and know love. Let me work hard and not tire. May my every word inspire my brothers and sisters as I labor for an end to sexual violence for women with disabilities. I pray for the day when they see themselves as they truly are. Soulful, beautiful, sensual, titillating, captivating, illuminating women of distinction. A catalyst of peace, worthy of royalty. Are you committed, or do I stand alone? How many with me shall stand to be a catalyst of peace?
All right. Okay. All right, and with that, we want to open up for comments and questions and other considerations. So I will call on Maggie, and as she's getting those ready, I wanted to again highlight we have the considerations webinars coming up, and then on December 15th we will gather again to really talk through some action planning items. So whether you are a provider looking to really break out and update policies and procedures at your agency, whether that's readability or making documents more readable, or really deciding how and when you're going to provide classes or anything like that, we're going to really have some designated time to work through that and hear from other agencies who have done this already and are doing it quite well. So we just want to make ourselves available to you to share resources and knowledge that we've gained. And then we have some really exciting additional events that are happening, excuse me, in December. We have a Healthy Relationships Talk, which is going to be really exciting. We have a great panel of incredible advocates from the disability community who are going to talk through, all that goes into healthy relationships, especially in the time of COVID, while having disabilities. Next, we have an art and trauma recovery event. We're going to hear from a local artist in the Chicago area who are, really creating wonderful works and talk through trauma recovery. Next, we'll have a panel or a presentation on disability and bisexuality. And then lastly, a healthy sexuality and sexual expression panel discussion on December 17th. So please join us. And then I'm going to put up our email addresses and information and then open for questions if anyone has any.
I don't have any questions coming through yet, Tara, unless you want to just confirm that folks will be getting a copy of the PowerPoint with the recording link sometime. Do you have a timeline on that or no?
Probably in the next day or two. Absolutely. Yeah.
Quick turnaround, folks.
We're on it at the Alliance.
Indeed.
Yeah. And if anyone has any questions specifically about other sessions, we'd be happy to share that as well. Just something to keep in mind, we will have interpreters and closed captioning for every single event, which is really exciting. And all of the following presentations will, every session will be run by individuals with disabilities. So that was another part of this grant project, was to uplift and amplify voices of those in the disability community and make sure that they get paid competitive wages for all the incredible work that they're doing. So I just wanted to mention that too. Jaejin, am I missing anything? Do you have any last few remarks that you want to make?
Sure. I just wanted to echo your appreciation and gratitude. Thank you all for being here. I also wanted to thank on the back end, Maggie Arthur, who is a phenomenal prevention specialist out of the Resilience Center, our local partners of Illinois Imagines and a rape crisis center here in Chicago, who has been an outstanding partner and taking care of the technical aspect for us today, as well as Christine Beck, who is the Alliance's operations director, who was very patiently and thoroughly taking care of RSVPs and making sure that you all get the link that you needed today. Slides. And our wonderful ALS interpreter, Anne, and our captioner, Kathy. Thank you so much for your support today.
And I have two questions just came through. One I can answer, and then one I will toss to you, Tara and Jaejin. One question was about CEUs, and so I can just say make sure that you are in contact with Christine Beck, because she'll be handling the CEUs, and I can post her email in the chat too. And then the other question was, would you say that individuals with disabilities are scared of sexual abuse? Are they aware of it? Do they know to watch out for it? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, well, the first thing I'll say is that disability, we're not a monolith, right? So everyone is going to be different. I think that a lot of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities that we hear from are craving this information, not so much because they want to run out and be sexual, but because, it really is a foundation for healthy relationships and healthy relationships with staff and family and things of that nature, that we see people are struggling and they really need this information. But also, some of them do want to explore that. I would say that, yeah, because we know people are at a higher risk for abuse, they're aware of it. And I think that the challenge that we are trying to straddle with this series and also the work that we do is, how much do we focus on violence prevention and also focus on healthy sexuality, right? Because we don't want to be constantly scaring people and saying, oh, you know, this is the risks are really high, but also, you know, there has to be a balance of providing the opportunity to explore and as Jajan so eloquently put before, that when you have experienced trauma, that's not an end, right? That we can go forward and have healthy relationships, and that sometimes it might be hard or triggering or stressful, but there is that hope there that we can move through these experiences. Jajan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, and I agree. I think in terms of are people aware? Yes, I think on some instinctual level, we all on some instinctual level know when something is wrong or feels off. And again, because of the stereotypes and misconceptions, if there is a lack of information that many individuals with disabilities all across the disability spectrum, if they're not given the information as to what sexuality is, what sexual violence is, on those basic definitions, then I know in my experience when I talked with survivors, they in some cases, yeah, they did not know the words. They talked about how they felt, and because no one educated them on what to call it. And so it's just, again, why throughout the series and throughout our work, Tara and I and those of us who do this work are really big, passionate advocates for education and information, accurate information, outside and you know, take and remove, you know, all your life choices, your morals, your traditions. That's individual life choices. But what your body parts are called, everybody has a right to know what their body parts are called and what their functions are, and to be reminded that and reassured you have the right to control who and how you share your body in every capacity, because it's your body. And if we give that information to children, to, you know, able-bodied kids, and if that's true, we should make that true with all individuals, disability or
Right.
because it can go on forever.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the goal, right? That like
Yeah.
by the end of our careers, Jajan, we won't have to present on disability and sexuality because it will be so ingrained that there will be no difference, that we won't have to fight with early education programs to make sure that they're including kids in sex ed classes, or that, you know, that the integration is happening and that people have the information they need, that they can explore and just do everything that anyone else would be doing, right? I think that's the goal here. So hopefully we'll work ourselves out of our jobs by the end, right?
That's the hope.
Any other questions, Maggie?
Yeah, we have one comment and one question. The comment is, I can imagine it can be helpful to build self-love with that information and continue that empowerment. And I wanted to share that because I feel like y'all would agree. And then the last question in our last 3 minutes together is, how do you notice sexual abuse in someone who's nonverbal? So speaking of having the right language, what if you communicate differently?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that everyone communicates, right? We talked about that earlier, that, you know, when we talk to staff, when we do presentations with staff at agencies, you know the people you serve. You might even know them more or better than their own family, right? For some individuals, they haven't lived with their family, that you are their family, right? And so you will be able to, sometimes, as Jajan mentioned before, there are signs, right? And we're going to talk through that in the disability service provider training. We have a whole section on signs that we're going to go through. But, you know, if people are acting differently, if they are exhibiting certain emotions when they haven't before, if they're just the way that their body is. I think that there's lots of ways that we can tell. And also just encouraging individuals, no matter the way that they communicate, to communicate, right? That we don't want to just sort of cast aside people that we think of as not being able to do this or that, right? Adult bodies crave adult things, and so whether your IQ is 50 or 150, an adult body is inherently a sexual being and body, and so that's something that we want to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Jaden?
And along with that is, in terms of for folks who are nonverbal, as Tara said, people, whether you're a family, friend, or provider, you have a communication system in place. So remember that and use that, and go with observation. If the person, and how a person who is nonverbal communicates when they're upset, when something isn't right. And so it's a matter of just paying attention to that, and also allowing for the reality that if they're upset, that one of the reasons that they're upset is possibly because of sexual victimization. That for those of us who are providers or allies, it's one of the, again, going back, my big soapbox of myth is myth and stereotypes makes it easy to kind of forget or dismiss sexual victimization, but allow for that possibility. And if you will keep that open or cracked possibility open and available, check in on that using the communication system that you have. If there's not a system in the communication system that you're using that's directly talking about sexuality and sexual information, use investigation and work with the individual with disability, add that vocabulary into that system, so that can, and that's legitimate and that's appropriate, and to include those that vocabulary, because it's part of everybody's conversation, in the way that you're individual.
All right, any other questions?
I think that's it, and we are perfectly at time.
Okay.
All
Well,
right.
thank you all so much. We hope that you enjoyed this, and thank you for bearing with us through technology issues and PowerPoint slide issues. We really appreciate all of you and hope to see you on future webinars and at future events. So thank you so much. Have a great Tuesday. Is it Tuesday?
Thank you, everybody.
Is it Wednesday?
Thursday. Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday. Oh my goodness. Bye, everyone.